Golden State's the 10 seed with 27 losses. Minnesota's the 7 seed with 25 losses. I'm the most interested in the Warriors. And I've watched every minute of all of their games since they made this Jimmy Butler trade. And there's something here. And I don't know what it is yet, but I like it. I don't know where it's going to go. Their ceiling feels a little higher. I don't think they're going to win the title, but they're the most intriguing team to me that's not Denver or the Lakers or obviously OKC. I think they're the fourth most intriguing team to me, Rob.
Okay. Can I suggest what the thing is that you might be seeing?
Yeah, let's see it.
I would say two things maybe. Golden State actually shooting free throws. Great. Jimmy Butler helps with that. Two, something very exotic for the Warriors, attempting to score around the basket and sometimes doing so successfully. Like they blow a lot of layups. They have a lot of guys who clam up a little bit around the basket or can get stifled out with length. They obviously play really small. But having Jimmy as any kind of presence inside, even if he's also missing some layups now and again, just as a cutter, as a driver, as a transition force, it's a nice counterbalance to everything else that the Warriors have going on offensively.
Yeah, it feels like it rounded them out. I also, like you mentioned, the rebounding, the offensive rebounding, the free throws. That game yesterday that they played against Dallas, where it basically came down, if Moody makes a corner three, I think they win. If Jimmy just goes to the basket with his right hand instead of crossing over, going to Kyrie, they might win that one too. But the symmetry of the team seems to make sense now because Jimmy, even though, what is he, 6'5", 6'6"?
He's taller. I think he's more 6'7", 6'8" range.
All right, wherever he is. There's a post-up element with them that they just didn't have before unless it was Kuminga. And when it's Kuminga, you lose some of the IQ stuff. With Butler, you don't. You get the IQ stuff. So now you have him with Draymond, with Steph. And it's funny to call them a high IQ team because they also make some of the stupidest plays you'll see every night. I don't think any team has sloppier, worse turnovers, and yet they are a high IQ team.
Like Steve Kerr is about to have an aneurysm at any given moment in these games. And you get it. Like some of the passes Draymond throws for being a genius level playmaker are absolutely baffling, indefensible decision-making at times. And yet they get away with it because they have these hot shooting stretches. Their defense is obviously still pretty rock solid overall. And I think will only get better with Jimmy. But ultimately, I'm totally with you as far as the post-up elements of Jimmy's game. He's so intuitive in terms of the way he moves. That has fit in Golden State really seamlessly. Yeah. And he also just, in staggering him and Steph a little bit, it gives the Warriors something to do. And like they were really lacking that when Steph was off the floor. It's like, what do we run? I guess Brandon Pajemski is going to dribble for 18 seconds. There was way too much of that happening. And Jimmy Butler, if nothing else, orients them to, okay, this is an actual first option, even if he's not pounding the air out of the ball.
It's also a team that when Kuminga comes back becomes even more interesting because now they'll have multiple things to look at. They can ride him. There's some Butler Kuminga stuff already. I don't know if you've seen it. Little hint of I might take this guy under my wing.
Okay.
Little mutual admiration society stuff. Maybe I'll take him to Jimmy Butler grad school. Not teach him the stuff from the last year in Miami, but the first couple years. One of the things that's been so much fun to watch with these Golden State games is just having Butler back as an invested, happy, engaged guy in the sidelines doing like fist bumps. Just super competitive aggro and not looking like he just lost his dog. And that he wants to just walk off the court. So I'm glad to have him back.
Yeah, even in the games. Like Jimmy Butler is one of the best contested rebounders in the league in terms of just the overall effort he puts in and how he goes after it, even against bigs. And if we're going to talk about like how Golden State makes a run or how they hold it together, how they challenge some of these other elite Western Conference teams, a big part of that is Jimmy Butler makes the version of small ball they play make a lot more sense. Like Moses Moody has been a thing for a while now, but the Moses Moody minutes make even more sense when you put him with Jimmy Butler. Kuminga's going to be a little different just because they are a little bit duplicative. They're going to be a little trickier to play together, especially if Draymond is also on the floor. Like it can jam up a little bit too much. And I'm curious to see what Kerr does with that, how he tries to separate those guys, if at all, in the rotation, because they're going to have to play a lot.
And Dallas in the first half of last night's game tried to use the Draymond Jimmy lack of shooting from deep thing against them, and then Golden State figured that out. They went with the small ball thing. Dallas didn't have their centers last night, so it's hard to make too much out of it, but they went small. I guess Jimmy was the 4, and then they had Moody and Pajemski and Curry with Draymond, and it was fun. They were like hustling around, and it was old school Draymond. Here's the thing I'm watching with them, and I've been watching this for a while. and I really started thinking about it with the Ringer 100, with that exercise of just trying to rank the best players against each other. And Curry was just a blind top 7, top 8 guy. I'm not positive he's there anymore, and I don't know where he is in the top 20. But there's two things I've noticed. One is the consistency of being great just doesn't seem there. He's become a once a week, I'm awesome guy. He doesn't have the great kick-ass games that he used to have.
Yeah.
And I actually went through and I just looked at two things, because this is hard to kind of quantify. How do you measure somebody's ceiling as a great player versus where it's been the last 10 years? He's 36 years old. You can look at all the counting stats. They're down a little bit, but not like too much. But the thing that was interesting to me, so in 2016, his second MVP season, he had 13 40-plus point games. And then if you go on Basketball Reference, that weird game score thing they have that I think I mostly like, it's at least... It's something. If you're in the high 20s or higher, that means something good happened with the game you played.
It's
so
like
he
the PER of box score stats, right?
Yeah,
like it gives you a general indication that something is up.
It's that you did a bunch of things well in the same game at kind of an unusually high level. So about 29 is a really nice game score in Basketball Reference. Again, arbitrary. Yeah. But he had 24 29-plus games from a game score standpoint in 16. This season, he has 3. This season, he has 0 40-point games. So even if you go back to 2022, he had 7 40-point games in their final season. He had 10 29-plus game score games. In 23, he had 13 29-plus game score. The point is, like, every once in a while, Steph Curry was like, we're not losing tonight. I'm Steph Curry. I'm just going to have an awesome game. And that's really not what I'm seeing from him in the same way this year. And I wonder if it changes after the All-Star break, or is this just who he is at age 36? I don't know the answer. What do you think?
I suspect having Jimmy will help with some of that. And just from an overall workload perspective, Jimmy and Kuminga coming back will lift some of what is on Steph right now. Ultimately, though, I think that is who he is at this point in his career. I don't think he's going to have those singular scoring outbursts all the time. But the good news for Golden State, I don't think the rest of the league has entirely caught up to that. I don't think they will catch up to that, because history tells us they don't with legends, right? Like, you put Steph Curry on the floor, someone sees him, they are going to freak out. And that's why, virtually regardless of how many points Steph actually scores, he has a massive, massive on-court impact in terms of the offensive production. Like, he is not at a Jokic level, because Jokic is really in a class unto himself there, but with Shea. Right, like with the other really high-level offensive operators, in terms of the difference of having him on the court, even when he's not hitting consistently, even when he's not going for 35 or 40 points. He just scares the hell out of people. I think that part will always be true, even if Steph is 45 rolling out there.
Yeah, if you're saying what defender makes a guy who's in the paint, who realizes he's open, run full speed at him like he's running out of a cabin in a horror movie, Steph is still... number one in this. The other piece of it is they had to work so hard to get him offense in the first half of the season.
Yeah.
With this goofy team they had. And then he also had to play a lot because their record wasn't that good. And I do wonder, with the reset of the break and then the Jimmy piece of it and the symmetry of the offense coming into play a little bit, and then Kuminga comes back, maybe it'll be easier for him to rack it up and have the thing that would make him special, were like the 16-point third quarters and just the little scoring barrages. That's what's not happening anymore. And then you throw in the sloppiness. Like, their clutch record this year, I think they're just like 500.
Yeah.
And they've blown a bunch of dumb games.
And by volume, they've just been in a lot of close games, which that in itself, as you're saying, is taxing, because it forces Steph to play more minutes to even get to that point.
The reason I think it's important, and I'm not doing the ESPN thing where it's like, just A block, just talk Warriors or Lakers, and that's it. That's the rule. I really do think there's something here. I think there's something here with the Butler, Curry, Draymond thing. I kind of like their role guys. And I think if they can hang around, there's a competitive, kind of intuitive infrastructure that some of these other teams don't have. Like, I don't trust Houston to have it. Memphis, I don't know what to make of anymore. I just assume Ja's not playing now. When I turn Memphis on, it's like surprising to see him. It's one thing after another with him. And then Minnesota is a mess. I don't try, especially when Edwards has had two like really, really, really awful games in a row. They did win tonight. They beat OKC. But just maybe Minnesota will be the only one I see that I could see in the conference finals. I don't think it's gonna be Dallas. OKC, Denver. Is there anybody else you have on your radar to maybe make the West Finals and do like what Dallas did last year? Dallas catches fire. They have that streak. All of a sudden, they're in conversation. Who is that this year?
I still give Memphis a little credit in that conversation. I think we clearly have to wait and see what the Lakers are capable of. But at this point, Denver's got the inside track. And teams are going to have to figure out not just how to outflank them, but how to beat them specifically if that matchup comes on board, which is, I would say, the toughest single matchup available to anyone is what do you do with Nikola Jokic right now? Because we're seeing Minnesota, case in point tonight, OKC is a vaunted, unbelievable defense. But Minnesota has some inroads there to score against a team like that. Naz Reid is clearly a huge part of that formula. Granted, they're not playing with their usual team. Julius Randle out, Rudy Gobert out, Mike Conley, Dante DiVincenzo. And yet...
And Gobert didn't play tonight either.
Absolutely. They didn't have the ability... They didn't have their normal set of players, but they found things that could work against the Thunder defense for as wonderful as it is. I don't know that there's those answers for many teams about Nikola Jokic. There's just not a lot of conceptual stuff you can throw at him that's going to work. That's not to say you can't leverage the occasional off night from Jamal Murray, elements of Russell Westbrook's game, parts of the back end of the rotation, Michael Porter maybe not swinging the ball as fast as the Nuggets might like him to sometimes. There's buttons to press. The Nuggets are not unbeatable, but they look really tough right now. And they look like a really tough matchup specifically for the rest of this Western Conference field.
Murray came back.
With a
Priscilla and I did that live show
55
in Denver.
Points.
Yeah, we had a heart-to-heart with 1,100 Nuggets fans. This Murray thing is bad. You guys, this is alarming what's happening. But the best case scenario was, he just needs to play himself in shape.
Yep.
And he did. He played himself in shape, and he looked noticeably skinnier within 3 weeks. His burst came back. The 55-point game he had this week, it was not an aberration. He's been blowing by people and look like Murray. So now all of a sudden those Jokic 48-point games, those are out the window. You don't need them anymore. Now he's back to being by the end of the third quarter, he's got 22, 12, 9. Porter's also playing better. They just look like the really Nuggets again. So I don't know. People like this podcast, for instance, maybe overreacting to the first 2 months, but the Murray thing was scary because the Paul George thing was also scary. And guess what? That continues to be completely terrifying. So, there was real signs of danger, but Murray played himself out of it. To his credit.
The Paul George thing is bordering on reanimated corpse at this point, and Jamal Murray has found some kind of life, some kind of burst, and I think most importantly, the edge and the aggressiveness in his game. That's always when Jamal is feeling whatever injuries he has at a given point or just a shaken confidence, he doesn't push in the way that the Nuggets absolutely need him to push. And to see that version of Jamal Murray back, that's a thrilling thing to see.
So right now we have OKC, Memphis, Denver as the top three. Denver threatening to pass Memphis. Houston, Lakers, and Houston just has not been good for a couple weeks, but they've had some injuries. Lakers, I don't know what happens with them. 32-20. Clippers 30-23 have been confusing for about a month now.
They're fine.
And then we move into that Minnesota, Dallas, Sacramento, Golden State thing. And we're going to talk about it when we do the NBA six-pack. The most notable thing is the Spurs feel like they've fallen out. And I think Phoenix is not dead, but people are definitely around the table like John Hamm and Landman. They're definitely around the hospital bed, and maybe the doctor's like, you might want to say your goodbyes soon. They're almost at that point. But it feels like we actually might know the 10 playoff teams now. Unless you think Sacramento can fall out of this, because they had a bad loss with New Orleans tonight. They've won some goofy games. They're 20-27. They honestly could be 22-34. So if Phoenix was going to catch a team, that would be the team I picked. But what do you think? Do we have our 10 now?
I think this might be the 10, and that is somewhat confidence in the Kings, more so pessimism in the Suns on my part.
Okay. Confidence in the Kings.
I mean, mild confidence. I think they've got some stuff to work with. I think they have a reasonable play-in level roster as currently constructed.
I agree.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a reason we're not going to be talking about them in the vein that we're talking about Golden State, which is to say an actual threat potentially to do something with the talent that they have. And we were talking about this on group chat today too. I don't know if it's the Jimmy Butler element specifically that makes Golden State feel like a wild card in the same way that his Heat teams felt like a little bit of a wild card. It's just hard to write off. And it's hard to write off looking at this Golden State rotation and thinking, okay, you know what? Like when it really matters, the Pat Spencer minutes are going to evaporate. And the Quinn Post minutes are going to evaporate if they have to. Like they're going to get what they need out of these supporting guys, but their best players are going to go the distance. And the question at that point will be, how hard did Steph and Draymond and Jimmy have to push to get them into the play-in or to get them into the playoff? And will they have enough left from that point?
You made a point earlier about Minnesota and how something about them seems comfortable against OKC, which is something you couldn't really say about a lot of teams. I think that might be just a lot of length on the perimeter and interchangeable guys and just people to throw at SGA. Today was the recipe for how you beat OKC in a playoff series where, one, SGA doesn't have a good game.
Yeah. That
and
always
then
helps.
Two, they don't make a ton of threes. And, you know, it is a team, and I guess you could say this about any team in the league, but I really feel with them when they're down like 12 and you go, I mean, this is it. This is how you beat them. And then they win like their next 13 by an average of 20 points a game. But they can have that, you know, you can hit them with the haymaker. So if they're down 3-2 in a playoff series on the road in a game like today, would be the recipe, I think. I still don't 100% trust anyone else on their team offensively except SGA. And that's the one thing that gives me pause with like, just pencil them in. Like they have the best odds to win the West and it's an easy pick for the finals. But that's the one thing that makes me nervous when it's really nerve-wracking gut crunch time. Ball crunch time? Gut crunch?
Nut crunch, I think is
Did
the
I just
expression
invent the phrase gut crunch?
The old gut crunch.
Who am I going to if like Shea has 5 fouls late in the third quarter and I just need somebody to get me offense for like 6 minutes? That's what makes me nervous with them.
The answer is probably J-Dub, and that's a reasonable answer, but he also doesn't exactly play that way all the time. Like they are such a process-oriented team where they're just going to move it and go through their system and trust in the shots that they get. And I think reasonable people can disagree as to whether those shots are ultimately what you need in now TM gut crunching time. I think
gut crunch.
Look, they clearly need a little bit more, as evidenced by the fact that they can occasionally put up like a 14-point fourth quarter, like they did against Minnesota today. That's not going to do it, even in a game like this where you have a bit of a deficit you're working back from to begin with. It's an area where you hope over time J-Dub grows into that responsibility. Chet Holmgren, who I think played his third game since coming back from injury tonight, he will grow into that responsibility over time. Hopefully, he looks quite rusty, understandably, right now. So he's going to get better and better over the back part of the season. But that's the wild card with them. And I think if they don't do as well in the playoffs as they would have liked, or as many of us would have anticipated, a lot of us are going to be wondering, was there a lever to pull there in terms of getting more of a spark plug scorer at the deadline? Not someone who has to be a part of your permanent, like a fixture in Oklahoma City, a pillar of the community. But could you not get a guy who could get a bucket on demand when you maybe really needed it?
We talked about it a little last week. I'm in the camp. They're playing so well and they look so good. And Wiggins, especially, that was the spot you would have improved. But he was just playing really well, and it's
he was
like
balling out. He was scoring in bunches.
Yeah. So, all right, we trade Wiggins and contracts and a few of our picks to try to get DeAndre Hunter. Are we even better? Wiggins was playing really well.
Yeah.
Would you rather pay Wiggins like a much smaller contract or Hunter $18 million a year? I can see why they always value the continuity. And it's one of those things that if it's in May and they lose in round 2, we're gonna be like, why didn't they make a trade? I told you.
But you're right. Like, it's hard to look at a roster winning 80% of its games and being like, yeah, you should have done something. Like, they're doing a lot every night to beat basically every opponent put in front of them.
And a close team, too, that really seems like that's where even the Cavs messing with what they have. It gets a little dangerous when you have a team that like clearly likes each other.
For sure.
Dallas is the only other team, just quickly. Who knows when Davis comes back? The way Kyrie has played and kind of, I mean, this is like one of the great 180s we've had by an athlete, the Kyrie the last 2 years, where I think he senses the moment in the city of Dallas and the press conferences, the interviews that he's given, the way he's played, where he's like, No, I got this. Come over here. Like, don't abandon the ship yet. If they can get Davis back in time, I don't know if they can, but if they can, it is an interesting team. They have size, they have length, they have defense, and the fans who seem like they were going to revolt against this team even 3 days ago. Like, I don't know, they were into the game today. They were cheering those guys, and so they're kind of, I guess, over here on this side, depending on where they land. Right now, they are 30-26, but no Davis for at least a month. So they'll be somewhere between 8 to 10, I would say, in the play-in, right?
I would think. And look, the win over Golden State yesterday, massive
Huge
game in terms of play-in implications. But yeah, they need Davis back, and more importantly, they just need a big, a single able-bodied big who is not Omax Prosper on stilts. Like, they just need somebody in that spot to do big man things. And credit to them for getting by the way they have. Credit to them for winning tonight, not only under the circumstances, missing all these bigs, missing Anthony Davis, but Kyrie didn't play in this game either. But his spirit lived on in Dante Exum, and they beat the Heat. And Dallas just kind of keeps on marching right now. It's been very impressive to see the way they've rallied.
They beat a Heat team that just looks mediocre every night now. It just looks like it's the end of the line. I'm thinking about the gut crunch. It's like a 90s exercise machine. Like I'm doing ads for it.
Yeah,
you got the gut crunch right now. Call now. It's half off. Let's unpack 6 major things going on in the basketball world right now. We have to start with the 76ers. So I was thinking big splash teams in the last 25 years that just ended up being disappointing. Going back to post-lockout, the 1999 Rockets.
Yeah.
When they put Barkley and Pippen and Hakeem together and they were like, look at this. And then it was bad. The 2004 Lakers, even though they made the finals, that was still kind of disappointing the way it ended. But the big ones, 2013 Lakers with Dwight and with Nash.
Yeah. Now
and
this
Kobe.
Is going to be fun.
Wasn't
very fun.
The Prokhorov Nets post KG trade with Pierce and Joe Johnson and Darren Williams and Prokhorov, oh my God, he's going to basically do what the Dodgers just did in baseball. It didn't happen. 2019 Celtics, after they made the Eastern Finals without Kyrie came back. Hayward came back. Tatum, Jaylen Brown. I think I went on Jalen and Jacoby's ESPN show and predicted them to win in the mid-60s. That did not happen. The 22 Lakers with LeBron and AD and a new addition, Russell Westbrook.
Sure.
They ended up winning 33 games. And then the Nets, after the foot on the line season.
Of course.
The KD, Kyrie, Harden thing. Where does the Sixers just sucking? They're 20-34. Where does this rank on the I can't believe this is happening scale for you? Because there were some signs.
Yeah, it's hard because there are the precursors. I don't think any of us were fully trusting Joel Embiid's health coming into the season. Certainly, Paul George has given us reason to be dubious about his long-term ability to stay on the court. But I would never have anticipated that basically every single thing that could go wrong has gone wrong. Every bright spot that has emerged in the rotation, short of Gershon Yabusele, which I'm not trying to jinx him, wrap him in bubble wrap, protect Gershon at all costs, please.
Yeah.
Every other bright spot in the rotation has been snuffed out by injury, by circumstance. Like, nothing is working. And that's hard to predict, clearly, but also hard to wrap your mind around, like how so many things could go wrong at one time.
Yeah, so there was some Paul George stuff that came out today from Shams that he had a screwed up finger tendon on his left hand. He's getting injections for it. I'm sure that's true, but it doesn't explain the fact that he looks just slower and more plodding and doesn't seem to have nearly the same burst and just seems like not only a step slow, but a second slow in his processing. And I don't know how that's the left hand tendon thing. I don't get it.
I don't think it is. Yeah. I mean, we can kind of parse those things out because there is the step slow thing as well, right? Like, you're not getting past Zaire Williams against the Nets. That's a problem, right? That's a problem on a game, in a game where Joel Embiid is not playing, Tyrese Maxey is not playing. This is your moment to do some of this, and you make one shot. And worse, you attempt 7. Horrible, horrible game for Paul George. All of that said, I have found myself at many points in this season being a bit of a Paul George apologist.
Oh.
And Look, that those days are very much behind me at this point. But the case for that apology, the defense of Paul George throughout most of the season has been a defense of the little things that he brings to the table, right? It's orienting the offense. It's being an adult on the court when they've badly needed it. It's spacing the floor. It's keeping the ball moving. Good connecting stuff, but role player stuff. And at some point, if you're doing all the role player stuff and you're failing every time you're asked to be a star, we have to call you what you are. And it's a $50 million role player. And that's a very tough position for the Sixers to find themselves at the very outset of this deal.
He hasn't helped himself with some of the comments either.
No.
Like when he complained about playing the 5. There hasn't been a lot of, I'll do whatever it takes to win games. If they need me to play there, I'll play there. It's just, there's a lot of like basic, you have to look at how the outside world is looking at you stuff with him. That just seems to be missing.
A Sixer should know never to say that they're bored doing something like playing the 5, because this life as a Sixer will be very interesting very quickly in ways that you do not want.
Well, the biggest thing they got was the Eagles had a playoff run and won the Super Bowl.
That's very true.
And Curtis and I talked about it on Thursday, this rarely seen Super Bowl news dump after they won, when they're like, hey, Embiid might get surgery again. We don't know where this is going.
Yikes.
And they just snuck that one out into the dead of night. But I think if Philly had been knocked down in round 1, the Eagles, and then, people really had a chance to stare at the Sixers season with the kind of season Maxi's having, where he's almost averaging 28 a game. Yeah, Baselli, they really lucked out with that. And they're 20-34. They're 6-14 in their last 20. In that last 20, they have the 23rd net rating. So they've just been a bottom 8 team for, a good 40% of the season here. They've only gotten 17 games from Embiid. And yet they're only a game and a half behind Chicago for the 10th seed, and Chicago doesn't want to keep winning. Well, so they might stumble in anyway.
I don't know if Chicago wants to keep winning or not, because their roster would tell you that they don't. The public comments would tell you that they are attempting to. So I really have no idea what to make of any of that, other than the fact that, look, the play-in crop in the East is an absolute joke. Like it is teams that are either too hurt to compete, don't have the resources to actually be good teams yet, or in Philly's case, a little of both. Like they just are not in a competitive place by any stretch of the imagination. Quentin Grimes should not be your best player. Like that is not a thing that should be happening. Justin Edwards should not be playing 30 minutes in a game. That's not where the Sixers ever anticipated this going, but it's the reality that they now have to navigate.
Orlando is 27-29 in the 7th seed, and they haven't been happy with their team for 2 months.
No.
Atlanta is 26-29. They're the 8th seed. They made 2 like borderline dumb trades. The Hunter trade and the Bogdanovich trade. Those are trades you make when you don't care where your season is going. They can't really dump because they don't have their first round pick. But and then you have Miami at the 9th seed, 25-28, who just look, I think they'd be maybe the second worst team in the West. Would you rather be Miami or Portland right now?
Portland is tough because they are winning themselves out of the tank race at the moment.
Yeah, I love it.
Their future is tough. And we should say Philly's future in terms of their first round pick, which they may or may not be able to actually keep, is looking dicier by the minute. They have to be very careful they don't accidentally lose that pick at this point.
I want to audible to that as the second thing of the 6-pack. But before we do, the Embiid thing, do we see him again? He's played 17 games. Does he play 20?
We should not see him again. Like, tethered to this conversation, like they should be actively looking at shutting Paul George down, shutting Embiid down, managing these injuries over the back part of the season. It's time to regroup. Like, this is not going to resolve itself. And even if you could limp into the play-in and even limp into the playoffs, that is not a success for this version of this team. Like, being an easy out in the first round is not success for the Sixers. So at this point, sear into the skid, lean into the failure, live to fight another day, frankly.
The problem is making the playoffs. Embiid could never play 14 games in 4 weeks. It's never happening. So even if you miraculously won both playing games, I don't know where that's getting you. All right, the second thing, you mentioned the draft pick. OKC gets Philly's first after the top 6. So Philly keeps it first 6 spots. If it's the 7th pick, OKC gets it. But this is one of many things. This is the all-time what the hell is happening in the first round thing.
It's batshit.
It's either 15 or 6. There's so many teams. There's a couple things I can't even really figure out who gets the pick.
Yeah.
So it's about half the league. OKC gets Philly's first after top 6. They get Utah's first after the top 10, if it's out of the top 10, but Utah's probably going to keep that pick. Miami gets Golden State's first if it falls out of the top 10. I think that's probably happening. Atlanta gets Sacramento's first if it falls out of the top 12. I think that might happen. The Knicks get Detroit's first if it falls out of the top 13. I think that's happening. So we already have 4 teams that are going to give their pick to somebody else. OKC gets Miami's first if they don't make the playoffs, basically. So that's 50-50. We'll see. Then we have San Antonio gets Atlanta's first. Utah gets Minnesota and Cleveland's first. The Pelicans get the Lakers first. Brooklyn gets New Orleans first, Milwaukee's first, and the Knicks first. I think that's right. Does Brooklyn get New Orleans first?
I don't think they get New Orleans. I think they just get Milwaukee and the Knicks.
All right. I'm going to take that one out. Brooklyn gets Milwaukee's first and Knicks first. Keep it in the air. Orlando gets Denver's first. And then we have this trade where OKC can swap and get the best pick from the Clips or Houston, their choice.
Yes.
Houston can take the second best pick and swap it to Brooklyn for Phoenix's first. Phoenix, I guess, loses the pick either way, and then the Clips get the worst of all of those. I'm going to figure out that sequencing in about a month.
Yeah. We need a visual aid. We need somebody to come up with a flow chart.
All of those picks I laid out, what is the most alarming to you for the team losing the pick?
Oh, great question.
Atlanta?
The Atlanta ones are bad because it dramatically changes how they navigate their roster, what they're doing for the foreseeable future. It's on the one hand, I think it can be silly sometimes when teams like the Bulls, who were so protected they were probably going to keep their own pick anyway, go out of their way to trade to get their own pick back. It can be silly. But there is so much more freedom and flexibility as a franchise when you do own your own picks. Because the second they're out the door, the second you lose control of when you start the clock and when you start to rebuild and when you start to reboot. And that's how you get into these weird lost seasons where you're sort of languishing either in the middle of the standings or just outside the play-in, accomplishing basically nothing, but also losing lots of games and not getting any draft capital to result from it. The Atlanta ones feel really, really rough right now.
One thing I was thinking with all the OKC things in play, like let's say they get the 7th pick from Philly.
Yeah.
And let's say they get Miami's pick because Miami's a playoff team. And then they have their own pick.
Yeah.
And then they can also swap with the Clippers or Houston. So that's a middle. So they'll have 4 picks.
Well, they'll have 3. They'll have their own
3. Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
3, including Philly's pick, which could be in the 7, 8, 9 range.
Yeah.
But then they have all these other picks because they have a million kajillion picks.
Yep.
And we've been watching this going, what are they going to do with all these picks? They already like their roster. They only have a couple spots anyway. Could this be the year that they take that 7th, 8th, 9th Philly pick, if that's the pick, add like 8 picks to it and just say, give us Cooper Flag. Here's the all-time mother load of picks. Like, let's say Charlotte gets the first pick and they could just trade back like 6 spots out of the Cooper Flag spot and just get a war chest of the all-time most picks ever in a trade from OKC just to move back 6 spots. You'd have to have like a 4-hour meeting about that, I feel like. Cooper Flag's really good.
Yep.
I love him. I'm probably the highest on him out of because he's a big intangibles guy, and I know I'm going to overreact as we get closer to June. But you'd have to really think about it because it's not a Wembanyama pick.
And if you're OKC, I think you would also have to really think about it because what the Thunder need more than anything are cost-controlled players, really good players on cost-controlled salaries. Their roster is about to get very, very expensive very, very quickly. If you could have 4 cost-control years of Cooper Flag as you are contending with the rest of this roster, I'm hesitant to say this because we haven't seen Cooper Flag play in the NBA yet. If he is as good as advertised, that he might be the single most attractive piece to the Thunder for exactly that reason.
Stretch 4. Can
Runs
play
the
some
floor,
3.
good ball skills,
Incredibly
good
competitive.
sense.
Doesn't need the ball.
Checks out.
Yeah, and I know whoever gets the first pick wouldn't want to trade him, but there's a price for everything, and there's a price to make you go, holy shit. Like, you're going to offer me 220 cents in the dollar for this pick, but I honestly think that's what OKC has to do.
Here's the thing, though. If that pick does convey and OKC gets Philly's pick, 6 teams will have 20 picks in the first round between them. OKC, one of them. Brooklyn will have 3 picks. The Spurs, the Jazz, the Magic, the Wizards will all have 2 picks. That is an incredible consolidation of draft capital. And I don't know who ends up keeping a lot of those picks and who ends up moving them on because they're clearly valuable for all of these cost-controlled reasons we've just talked about. But if to just help you visualize at home as you're listening to us list off all of these swaps and protections and picks that may convey, basically every single pick from 18 to 30 is going to go to a different team, except for Indiana's pick and Boston's pick. That's it. Every other pick is probably going to change hands, and that's insane.
Yeah. And I don't even know how they fix it. And Adam Silver should not be the one explaining who gets what. They should maybe like hire Bobby Marks just for 3 hours as like his assistant, just to be over on the side, just laying out whatever.
Doing the touch screen. Like we have to raise pick swap literacy around the country at this point because this is becoming an epidemic.
Well, OKC and San Antonio is the other team. Like if Atlanta's pick miraculously got in the top 4 and it got to like 4, San Antonio would have enough assets to really try to climb 3 picks. So it'll come down to how generational you think Cooper Flagg is. And, you know, I don't think he's in the Wemby, Anthony Davis sure thing class. You really have to believe in some other stuff. I personally think there's no way he misses because of how competitive he is. But, you know, he's 6'7.5". There's things you could... to me, he's the perfect stretch 4, but we'll see. All right. Next thing on the 6-pack. Speaking of the draft, the Brooklyn Nets, the team that just won't tank. The team that has players telling reporters, hey, we're going to try to keep winning games. If you don't like it, don't root for us, which I love. So they're 20-34. They're 1.5 games behind Chicago for the 10 seed, which is tied with Philly. But does it feel the same as Philly to you, Rob?
Not even a little bit.
They have a great coach. They made the mistake of they kept Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton, but they also have D'Lo on the I'm so happy not to be on the Lakers anymore. I'm going to go nuts.
Yeah.
They're 6-1 in their last 7. Their defense held all 7 opponents to under 100. 7th net rating over that time. They bought out Ben Simmons. They traded Schroeder and they traded Finney-Smith. And yet they're still hanging around. And this was not the plan. They made a trade with Houston to try to get their picks back and give them Phoenix picks. And they were going to tank. Now, I don't know. They might make the playoffs. What would you do if you were running Brooklyn? Oh, you think a fake injury or you think of playoffs?
I think go for it. Honestly, I think go for it. It's always tough in these positions. And yes, I understand the long-term arguments, but I'm with you that I am moved by the enthusiasm of the team. I am moved by the amount of backbone they've been playing with lately and ultimately, particularly how good they've been on defense. This is a team that's like playing a pretty deep rotation, really high energy style, forcing a lot of turnovers. They can't score for shit, even now, but they get a lot of stops and they play with a lot of effort. And ultimately, here's the thing. I say you encourage the guys to go for it, and they ultimately will probably lose a lot of games anyway, but you didn't pull the rug out from under them. I think that's where you start to lose credibility with the players on your team, is when you start actively sabotaging their efforts to win just for the sake of the lottery. But if there's a way to let them run themselves out, and look, if you look at the teams that they've beaten at this recent stretch of games where they've been so successful, it's not exactly a murderous row. They will lose games against better teams eventually, but like let them find their spine, let them find their style, and ultimately what can be successful for them. And like let Nick Claxton wake up a little bit because he had a bit of a slow start to the season. Like these are meaningful developments for a team like Brooklyn.
I saw this happen a decade ago with Brad Stevens and the Celtics, and we were all going nuts because we wanted them to lose. But ultimately, like, you do build some sort of a weird DNA that you didn't just roll over, which brings me to the next person on my 6-pack list, or next team, Charlotte, who has achieved peak tank. I don't know if you've looked at their box scores. They tried to trade Mark Williams and couldn't get rid of him. And now I guess he's just in limbo as they fight about whether that trade was legal or not. Yeah. Brandon Miller had surgery, which is too bad. They signed Alfred Payton and Taj Gibson, and both of them are playing.
Well,
both of them are playing actual minutes.
Play. Yeah. Like, there's not really another option.
They took on Nurkic in a salary dump. And Nurkic has now found his destiny where, he'll have like a 27 rebound game where they still lose by 28. And then they also have LaMelo Ball, who's one of the great great stats, bad team guys of the last 30 years. I thought it was hilarious that people are like, wow, how did he get left out of the All-Star game? He just jacks up shots and they lose. He's not an All-Star.
That's unkind. I think LaMelo is better than that. I think he's better than that.
Was that a defensive LaMelo Ball?
I'm willing to go out on that particular limb. Like, I think LaMelo he is on another planet in terms of some of the things he chooses to do, but has a facility with the game that not many guys have, and ultimately is basically the only reason the Hornets have been anything close to solvent at any point in this season. So he doesn't have a lot to work with when he's out there. Bigger concern for me, in addition to all of his habits and kind of the judgments he makes on the court, clearly just like that cursed ankles, tough injury history. If he's never going to be consistently healthy, how is he going to consistently grow as a creator? And that's a problem for a player like him.
Would you want to play with him for 6 months a year? Be honest. Would you want to be his small forward? Would you want to be Brandon Miller?
Would I want to play with anyone under the age of 25? I think the answer is probably no. Like, there is a stylistic difference between us.
This is the only team. I really like Charles Lee. I think he's a good coach. This is the only team I don't want Cooper Flag to go to.
See, I think he and LaMelo could run beautifully together.
Oh, I don't know. Anyway, they're in position to get him.
They certainly
They're working it. Next one on the six pack. The Chicago Bulls putting together the finishing pieces of an epic 10-year run, starting in the 15-16 season, 42-40, 41-41, 27-55, 22-60, 22-43, 31-41, 46-36 in the 22 season.
Yeah, feisty.
Lost in the first round. 40-42, 39-43, 22-33 with a chance to make the play-in again. This is Reinsdorf's like manifest destiny, just to not pay luxury tax.
Yep.
To be somewhere near the play-in, to not actually be a threat, to not really have a direction. It's like, are they tanking? Are they like, they re-signed Lonzo Ball? They could have traded him for a first-round pick. It came out. Now they kept him. They have Giddey. They have Kobe White. Kind of like Budzelis. Vucevic is still there.
Yeah.
They overpaid Patrick Williams. I don't know what this team is. They don't either. And this is just what we're doing in the third biggest city in America, Rob.
Apparently it is. I get from that 10,000-foot perspective why Reinsdorf is the guy who comes up. I don't want to give Arturas Karnisovas too much cover here because I feel like Nico Harrison has done him an incredible favor. Patrick Dumont has done him an incredible favor, taking a lot of the airspace of the NBA right now. And I think it just kind of slid under the radar that after the deadline, Karnisovas went up there, had his press conference, and explained that there are 3 different ways to build the championship team. You can have 2 stars on it, you can have 3 stars on it, or you can have 9 or 10 very good players.
Yeah.
First of all, that has literally never happened before. No team has won a championship with 9 or 10 very good players. Not a thing.
Also, what isn't a very good player a star?
I don't know what threshold he's talking about, but
what's better than very good? Like great?
Well, let's talk about that. If it is, even if that were true, even if that were what the Bulls are trying to do, how many players on their current roster are very good or even like pretty good?
I don't think they have one very good player. I don't think Kobe White's very good. I think he's good.
He's probably the closest. Theoretical Lonzo Ball might be the closest. We hope Manas Buzelis can be that. Vooch some nights.
Very good to me is like if my son came home from school and I said, "How did your history test go?" And he said, "Very good."
Okay. I'm
thinking that's like an A-. Very good is like really positive.
Yeah, there are no A- players on this roster. I'm not even sure that, like, this is a roster that is scraping for solid B- talent right now. And if to the extent that it's there, it's probably years away from developing.
They got nothing from Levine. They have no extra first-round capital other than this weird protected first-rounder they have from Portland that they'll probably never get. They have an absentee landlord as an owner. I think I would take every single team in the East's future over theirs.
Yeah. You would take Charlotte's, you would take Philly.
Charlotte, Brooklyn, the Brooklyn picks.
Yep.
Even Philly, I have Maxey and I have, hopefully some tradable assets and maybe Embiid will come back. Maybe I could turn Embiid into something. I would rather have every other roster in the East over Chicago's. I don't even know what their number one asset is.
What a day for the Wizards. You know, they had to win something eventually. They won your heart, at least relative to the Chicago Bulls. Congratulations to the
Honestly,
Washington
Jordan
Wizards.
Poole's probably better than anyone on the Bulls this season.
Is the darkest sentence that I've ever heard someone say.
Jordan Poole,
and it might be true. I think it's true. But
I
it's
thought somebody should have traded for him. We talked about it last week. I actually think he's really figured some shit out, and he's at least done it on a big stage before. But
Jordan
Poole's
had an
Koulibaly and Sarr and Carrington, and
they've got guys.
They're okay. They're going to have cap space.
I'll do credit to Jordan Poole, who's had an exceedingly normal NBA season, and for him, for a guy that talented, that's a huge step forward.
If I was a Chicago Bulls fan, I would be losing my mind.
Rightly so.
They're in the third biggest city in America. The Celtics are about to sell for between $6 and $6.5 billion. So the Bulls are worth somewhere around there. Why can't they just sell the team if they're not going to run it correctly? Like,
great question.
How long can you live off the Jordan? And how long can you be like, oh man, if D Rose didn't get hurt in round one, oh man, that was 13 years ago.
I know.
Last one on the six pack. You wanted to talk about the Suns, who have a net rating in their last 15 games of 18th, who in their last 58 games, including the playoffs, are 26 and 32, who tried to trade Kevin Durant for about a week before they told him or his agent or his manager that was even happening. And now it's like, yeah, this summer they're probably going to trade KD. This is grim. What are you seeing?
It's not as loud or as dramatic as what's going on in Philly. And so, yeah, they get the lead in terms of the dumpster fire power rankings here. It's so disappointing to see the Suns in such disarray, quietly sucking all this year and seeing none of the primary stakeholders of that team do a single thing to fix it. And this isn't ultimately like a second apron problem or a no trade clause problem. Like, those are obstructions, right? In terms of Phoenix making its roster better. They're not obstructions for anyone on this team playing into the ball on defense. They're not obstructions for anyone on this team fighting for a rebound. They're not obstructions, most crucially, to finding some semblance of offensive flow for a super talented team on paper. Like, I know there is a worse than the sum of its parts thing happening here, because basically none of the parts complement each other at all. It's just a lot of guys in their individual lanes not making each other better. And that is really a really tough watch for people like us at this stage in the season. I just don't get the sense that anyone involved in it particularly likes participating in that offense either, or participating in this season. And so it's so disjointed. It's so unpleasant. I really dislike where the Phoenix Suns find themselves. And I don't wish this on any of them. This is just who they've been.
Well, the problem is they had a certain coach last year that they made the scapegoat for everything, Frank Vogel, who won the 2020 title. They brought in Coach Bud, completely different philosophy. He's going to unleash these guys offensively, and they're even worse. But to me, it's a talent problem. I was looking, right around this time where you have like I would say OKC, Boston, and Cleveland are the three best teams, right, in some order. And then you think like they probably have the best rosters, the 9-man rotation. Who would you take on a team like Phoenix? How many of their guys, other than the top two, would even play for one of the top three teams? So that would be either Beal.
Yeah, he would.
I think Beal would play off the bench for at least Boston and Cleveland. I don't know about OKC. Maybe. Who's he playing over?
He would play.
Who's he playing over?
They need somebody like him. That's
so
the sort of
so you're giving him Isaiah Joe's minutes?
Sure. Yeah. So I feel fine giving Bradley Beal Isaiah Joe's minutes.
Okay. So he's in the 7, 8, or 9th man range for the top three teams. Fair?
Maybe 6th on the right roster.
Okay.
Given
maybe first guy off the bench.
First guy off the bench.
I would still rather bring Pritchard off the bench before him, but that's just me. Grayson Allen or Royce O'Neal, do they play for any of the top three teams in the top 9 of their rotations?
I mean, this is kind of the Torrey Craig corollary, because didn't he just kind of crack into Boston's rotation a little bit?
10th man. Yeah.
Royce O'Neal can do a lot of Torrey Craig things. I would say slightly better than Torrey Craig on balance. Grayson Allen, very much an issue of how much you need his shooting. And frankly, this season, whether his shot is on or not. Lately, it's been looking a lot better. Start the season was not there. If he's streaky, he's not very viable. So that's a huge problem in terms of high-level competition.
Nick Richards?
Yeah, I think he can get minutes.
Maybe Boston, like the
Yeah.
Cada, the random Cada game. Maybe Nick Richards is getting that
Cada,
instead.
The Luke
I bring this
Cornett
up
minutes.
because it's just grim what Phoenix did with all the stuff they traded away. And, I defended the Durant trade when it happened, or at least the idea of it. Even that night, none of us understood why Cam Johnson was in it. But when you're throwing in as many assets as they did, but then also paralyzing themselves to trade other picks, and I don't see an out, and I don't really know what KD is worth this summer either.
Yeah.
Shit, that's not like a miraculous parachute out of here. It's gonna be his 19th season next year. What are you getting for him? Are you getting like Jalen Green and a first and I don't know. Like, what are you actually getting for Kevin Durant at this point in his career?
If that's how
he's got 1 year left in his deal.
That's even worse than this, frankly. That's the hard thing about interrogating Kevin Durant trades is the packages feel more depressing. And I think the packages also force you to confront what you as an organization in the Phoenix Suns have done with Devin Booker's career. A player who had to come into his own, who took his time, who grew as a playmaker, who grew as a creator, who, to be totally fair, is not having an amazing season by his standards, but a good enough one, a good enough Devin Booker season. And if you use that whole period of time and you have one trip to the finals in a somewhat weird Western Conference field, and that's it, that's the primary feather in the cap of the Devin Booker era, that's really sad, honestly, for a star who's had this kind of long-lasting relationship with the team. Like, you would hope that a player like that would be rewarded with better.
How many teams did Luka fuck up during his career in the Mavs?
Yeah.
Because that
Suns
game 7 definitely was some sort of weird catalyst with the Suns.
Yep.
The fact that they beat Minnesota, I think led to, I don't know if they trade Towns if they make the finals.
Probably not.
Then Dallas themselves, that's another one. Right. So there's 3 with the blood on his hands. Yeah, the Phoenix thing feels like a wrap. We have not heard a lot from Ishbia lately.
No.
There are no fixes, and then they're in a conference where this can't happen. We're going to have San Antonio coming.
Yeah.
OKC's already there. Jokic, you go on down the line. It's like this is it.
They have the toughest remaining strength of schedule of any team in the league from this point. They're not going to make it.
Well, the sad thing is Brooklyn had a few of those picks that they gave back to Houston to get their pick back so they could tank, and now they're not even tanking correctly. But those Phoenix picks are looking pretty juicy. Before we wrap up the 6-pack, San Antonio, when do they throw the flag into this season? They're just far enough away that you could talk me into it.
What does throwing in the flag look like?
Some Wemby rest management. Some Wemby, hey, we need to sit him down for 3 games. We're worried about some fake tendonitis and some fake part of his body.
I'm not sure they need to do that. I think they're going to be, again, perfectly fine coasting out, losing some of these games. Now, if the Fox thing catches on in such a huge way where it's unavoidable, then yeah, maybe you have that discussion. But part of trading for De'Aaron Fox is accelerating at least a little bit. And I think ultimately their position is not so much tethered to their own pick, right? It's tethered to the other draft capital that they have. It's tethered to the guys they already have on roster. So I don't think they necessarily need to.
Counter?
Yeah.
Portland could pretty easily pass them. They could be the 3rd worst team in the West. And they would be either 4, 5, or 6 teams worse than them in the East. They could be in the 6 to 9 range with that draft pick, which puts you in lottery mode.
Not too shabby.
I actually really thought that they were going to make a little bit of a run, and they just can't. I thought Boston really exposed some of the issues with them. I don't know if you watched that game.
Yeah.
They attacked Wemby in a really unique way that I haven't seen teams do before, and just in general, it just looked like 2 different classes of teams.
Yep.
And then you think the Warriors got better. I don't really see the path for them. Anything else you want to hit before we go?
I think we covered a lot of it. We covered every mid to terrible team in the Eastern Conference, it feels like. So we really gave the people what they want today.
Well, that's it for today's 6-pack. But if that's not enough for you, remember, Michelob Ultra Courtside can get you closer to the action with tons of different prizes. Go stock up before the next game. Enter for your chance to win at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Begins October 1st, 2024. That already happened. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines. I'm almost done. Official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited. Enjoy responsibly. 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer. St. Louis, Missouri.